1,200 feet under Louisiana, Junius Gaddison stopped moving. He was listening, not to a drip, not to a leak in a pipe. This was different, a slow rush of muddy water pushing through the tunnel, strong enough to carry empty drums along with it. Gaddison worked in the Jefferson Island salt mine, hundreds of feet beneath Lake Peigneur, a lake so shallow you could wade across most of it, 10 feet deep, maybe less in places. Water simply did not belong down here. He didn't wait to find out why. He reached the alarm and triggered it.
Go!
3 flashes of the mine's warning lights, a signal every miner already understood. Get out, now. Above him, men started moving toward the elevator. Some hadn't heard a thing yet. Others were already listening to a sound one miner would later compare to ocean waves, rolling, distant, and wrong, because there was no ocean anywhere near a salt mine 1,000 feet underground. Whatever was happening, it was already bigger than the tunnel they stood in. And nearly a quarter mile above their heads, on the calm surface of the lake, a drilling crew had just noticed something was wrong with their equipment, with no idea their morning was about to collide with a mine they didn't know existed beneath them. The pipe that wouldn't come loose. It was still early, around 4:30 that morning, when the trouble started on the surface. A Texaco contracted crew from Wilson Brothers was drilling for oil from a floating platform anchored on Lake Peigneur. Nothing about the morning had seemed unusual. The lake was still. The work was routine. Then, roughly 1,228 feet down, the drill jammed. The crew tried to work it free. They jarred the pipe, pulled, adjusted, the kind of stubborn mechanical problem that happens on drilling jobs all the time. Except this one came with sound. Something below was groaning, shifting, in a way that didn't match a stuck drill bit. Then the platform itself began to tilt. Not much, just enough to notice. Nobody on that platform knew the truth yet, that their drill hadn't just gotten stuck in rock. It had broken into the roof of a salt mine running underneath the lake, a mine packed with tunnels and chambers that miners had spent years carving out. And now, the lake had a way in. Deep below, the water Junius Gaddison had just heard was only the beginning. It had found its opening, and it was about to turn one of Louisiana's calmest lakes into something almost nobody would believe, even after watching it happen. Racing the water. Underground, the evacuation had a problem nobody could fix quickly. The elevator that carried miners to the surface could only hold so many people at a time. The water level didn't wait for anyone. Not every miner had heard the alarm. Some were working deep in sections far from the main shaft, out of sight and out of earshot. Maintenance foreman Randy LaSalle drove into those remote tunnels himself, tracking down anyone who hadn't gotten the signal, telling them what he knew. The water was coming, and there wasn't much time left to argue about it. Every trip back to the surface mattered. Every minute the elevator spent going up and down was a minute the mine kept filling. On the lake above, the drilling crew had already abandoned their platform. The derrick was leaning harder now, and they weren't waiting to see how far it would go. They cut the barges loose and headed for shore. That's when the lake stopped behaving like a lake. If you like true stories where one ordinary morning turns into something almost nobody could have predicted, this is the kind of story Dark Atlas exists for. Because what Lake Peigneur did next is the part people usually can't believe. The lake turns against itself. The water on the surface began moving toward a single point. At first it looked like nothing more than a strong current. Then it became a whirlpool. Then the whirlpool kept growing until it stretched close to a quarter mile across, wide enough to pull in anything nearby. Barges got dragged toward it. A tugboat was pulled into the current along with them. Trees went under. Sections of land simply gave way and disappeared into the widening hole. Before it was over, close to 65 acres of Jefferson Island had vanished into what used to be a shallow lake. The drilling platform didn't sink slowly. It went under fast, swallowed the same way everything else was being swallowed. Then the disaster turned stranger still. Lake Peigneur normally drained out through the Del Cambra Canal toward the Gulf, but with the lake emptying into the mine below at that speed, the canal couldn't keep moving water in its usual direction. So it reversed. Water that should have been flowing out toward the Gulf started rushing backward into the collapsing lake instead, briefly turning the canal into a waterfall estimated at somewhere between 150 and 164 feet high, in a state that has no waterfalls of its own. And underground, miners were still climbing toward the surface, with no way of knowing whether they'd make it out before the mine they were standing in finished flooding, when the water came back. For hours, Lake Peigneur had been disappearing into the ground. Then the reversed canal began sending Gulf water back toward the crater where the lake used to be, and the lake started to refill. But it didn't come back the way it left. The shallow freshwater lake people on Jefferson Island had known their whole lives was gone. What replaced it was deeper, brackish, and reached a maximum depth of around 200 feet, turning what had been a 10-foot pond into one of the deepest lakes in Louisiana. The mine below was flooded. The drilling operation was gone. A large piece of the island no longer existed above water. Then came a detail almost nobody expects. 11 barges had been pulled down during the collapse. 9 of them eventually floated back up, once pressure inside the flooded mine equalized enough to push them to the surface. But the most remarkable part of this disaster wasn't what disappeared. It was who didn't. Every miner working below Lake Peigneur that day made it out alive. Not one person died, despite a collapse that swallowed land, a drilling rig, and nearly a dozen barges in a matter of hours. The question nobody could prove. Investigators tried to reconstruct what had gone wrong. The leading explanation pointed to an error in surveying or positioning, that the drilling operation had somehow ended up over a mine it was supposed to avoid. There were disputes over whose information had been used to place the rig, and where the mine's boundaries were believed to be. But proving it was another matter. The rig was gone. The mine itself was flooded, its tunnels buried under water and debris. Whatever evidence might have shown exactly how the drill ended up there had disappeared along with the disaster itself. The Mine Safety and Health Administration documented what happened. Lawsuits followed. Settlements followed too. But investigators were never able to say, with total certainty, exactly how it happened. We know a mine flooded. We know a lake vanished and came back changed forever. We know every miner walked out alive. What we don't know, not with proof anyone can point to, is how a drill bit found its way into a mine it was never supposed to reach. If you were investigating this one, where would you start? The surveying, the drilling records, or the mine's own maps? Tell me what you think happened. Lake Peigneur isn't remembered for the disaster it became. It's remembered for the 65 acres that vanished in an afternoon, the lake that came back nearly 20 times deeper than it started, and the fact that nobody died finding that out.